All right, let's dive right in today. We're looking at some fascinating developments in the Indian business world. More specifically, the cement industry. We've got a news article here from the Indian Express, and it's all about UltraTech Cement, one of the big players in the game.
Yeah, they've been making some headlines lately.
Big time. This article highlights a recent acquisition that's got everyone talking UltraTech's buying an 8.69% stake in Star Cement.
Mm-hmm.
And get this, for a cool Rs 851 crore.
That's a figure that definitely catches your eye, doesn't it? Makes you wonder, is that a significant chunk of change for a company like UltraTech? Or is this just spare change for them?
Right, Rs 851 crore. It sounds like a lot to me, but I guess it all depends on the scale we're talking about here. What do you think? Is UltraTech just flexing its financial muscles, or is there a strategy behind this move?
Oh, it's definitely strategic, no doubt about it. See, this purchase doesn't give UltraTech full control of Star Cement. It's a minority stake, right?
Okay, so less than 50%.
Exactly. But even with a minority stake like this, they can still wield a considerable amount of influence. And, this news comes right after UltraTech snagged a controlling stake in India Cements. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, I do recall that. So it seems like UltraTech's been on a bit of a shopping spree lately, huh?
Yeah, you could say that. They're making some bold moves in the industry.
So tell me, what's so special about this Star Cement? Why are they on UltraTech's radar?
Well, Star Cement's got a really strong presence in northeast India. And get this, they've been expanding into West Bengal and Bihar, too.
Interesting. So maybe UltraTech's trying to get a piece of that action, strengthen their position in those regions.
That's a very likely scenario. It's all about strategic positioning in the market.
It's like a game of cement chess, huh?
You got it. Every move counts.
So how big of a player is Star Cement anyway? Are we talking about a major force in the industry?
Oh, they're definitely not small potatoes. In FY24, their turnover was a cool Rs 2,910.66 crore.
Wow, okay. So we're not talking about a tiny startup here. This is a substantial company.
Right. So this acquisition, this deal, it's not just about adding a few trucks to their fleet or a couple more plants.
No, this sounds like a pretty significant move. But okay, let's zoom out for a second. For our listeners who might not be following the cement industry every day, why should they care about all this? What's the big takeaway here?
Well, this acquisition, and actually all of UltraTech's recent activity, signals a much larger trend. There's a consolidation happening in the Indian cement industry.
Consolidation, meaning fewer companies controlling more of the market.
Exactly. And UltraTech, well, they're already the leader in the industry. I mean, they have a whopping 156.66 MTPA capacity.
MTPA.
Million tons per annum. It's the amount of cement they can produce each year.
Okay, so that's a lot of cement.
Yeah, we're talking millions and millions of tons. And these acquisitions, well, they just solidify UltraTech's dominance even further, you could say.
So they're really cementing their place at the top. Pun intended.
Of course.
But seriously, what does this all mean for the average person? Someone who's not necessarily tracking cement production numbers. How could this impact their lives?
That's a good question. This kind of market dominance, when it has the potential to influence a lot of things. Think about the price of cement, the speed of infrastructure development. It's all connected.
So potentially higher costs for building projects, things like that?
It's a possibility. We'll have to see how things play out, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. It's almost like we're watching a game of Monopoly unfold in real time.
Yeah.
But instead of those little greenhouses and red hotels,
right.
We're talking cement plants and those massive distribution networks.
And I'm guessing in this version of Monopoly, there's no get-out-of-jail-free card for the competition.
Not quite. The stakes are high, and everyone's vying for that top spot. But what's even more interesting about this whole thing? It's not just a story about these big companies battling it out, this trend, this consolidation. It could actually hit you right in the wallet.
Okay, now you've got my attention. How is this cement saga going to impact my bank account?
Well, think about it. If one company, let's say UltraTech in this case, controls a big chunk of the cement market, they basically have a lot of say when it comes to prices, right? And when those prices go up, guess who ends up footing the bill?
Consumers like me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those costs trickle down. They always do. Whether it's, those rising housing prices or those big, expensive infrastructure projects.
So that dream home renovation I've been planning might suddenly become a lot more expensive. That's not what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, it's something to definitely keep in mind. And it goes beyond just individual homeowners, too. Rising cement prices, that could affect the affordability of new housing developments, make it harder for people to even enter the housing market.
So this isn't just a business story. We're talking about a real economic story that affects, well, everyone. Are there any safeguards in place to prevent a company like UltraTech from just, I don't know, raising prices and taking advantage of their position?
That's where the government steps in, right?
Well,
They have a role to play in making sure there's fair competition and that no one company gets too powerful and starts exploiting the market.
so the government could intervene, maybe set some price controls or create policies that encourage more competition?
Exactly. They've got a whole toolbox of options they can use.
Yeah.
But it's tricky. It's a real balancing act.
Sure.
Too much regulation and you risk stifling those businesses, preventing them from growing. But too little, well, then you open the door to all sorts of unfair practices.
Sounds like finding that sweet spot is crucial. But let's change gears for a second and talk about innovation. Does this consolidation, does it usually encourage or discourage companies from, coming up with new and improved products?
Ah, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
There are actually different schools of thought on this. Some folks argue that consolidation can actually stifle innovation.
Hmm.
Think about it. When you have fewer players in the market, there's less pressure to constantly innovate and come up with those groundbreaking ideas right.
Right, because if you're already the top dog, why bother shaking things up?
Exactly. But then there's the other side of the argument. Some people say that these bigger companies, they've got more resources, so they can invest more heavily in R&D, in research and development, and that can lead to some really amazing breakthroughs.
So it really depends on the company, their culture, their priorities.
Absolutely. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. The impact on innovation, it really could go either way. It all depends on how things play out. But let's zoom back out for a minute, back to the big picture. What does this consolidation trend mean for the future of the Indian cement industry, as a whole?
Yeah, what's the long-term outlook here?
That's the question everyone's asking. We might be witnessing a shift towards an industry where a few major players hold most of the cards. Now, that could bring some benefits, like greater efficiency and something called economies of scale.
Economies of scale.
Yeah, basically it means that as companies get bigger, they can often operate more efficiently, they can reduce waste, and ultimately lower those production costs.
So potentially some of those savings could be passed down to consumers, right? Although I'm guessing there's no guarantee of that.
Right, that's the tricky part. We'll have to wait and see how it all unfolds. But, the potential consequences of these moves by UltraTech, they're definitely worth considering.
Okay, so it's a mixed bag. There are potential benefits, but also some risks we need to be aware of. What should our listeners be watching for as this trend continues to develop? What are the key things to keep an eye on in the coming months and years?
Pay close attention to how the government responds to this whole consolidation trend. Will they step in with new regulations to promote competition? Will they do anything to protect consumers from those potential price hikes we talked about?
Those are some good questions to ask. Anything else we should be paying attention to?
Definitely watch how those other cement companies react to UltraTech. Are we going to see a wave of mergers and acquisitions as those other players try to, keep up? Or will those smaller companies find ways to adapt and carve out their own little niche in this changing landscape?
Sounds like the Indian cement industry is at a crossroads. The decisions made in the coming years, they're going to have a ripple effect throughout the whole sector. This is definitely a story worth following. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on something we haven't discussed yet. The environmental impact of all this. The cement industry is not exactly known for being the greenest, right?
That's a really important point, and you're right, it often gets overlooked. Cement production, it's a major contributor to carbon emissions globally.
Yeah, it's not exactly eco-friendly.
No, not really.
Yeah.
The process of making cement, it's very energy intensive and it releases a significant amount of those greenhouse gases.
So as UltraTech grows and, consolidates its power, what does that mean for their environmental footprint?
That's the question we should all be asking. As they ramp up production, we need to see if they're making those investments in sustainable practices and technologies, to try and minimize that environmental impact.
So while we're all focused on the economic side of this consolidation, we can't forget about the environmental side. It's all connected.
Absolutely. And as consumers, we have a role to play too. We can hold these companies accountable.
Right. We can support the companies that prioritize sustainability and demand more transparency about those environmental practices. But for now, let's zoom back in on UltraTech and their strategy. We talked about those acquisitions, but what other strategies might they be using to solidify their dominance?
One key area to watch is vertical integration.
Vertical integration, huh? That sounds like one of those fancy business school terms. What does that actually mean in the context of, cement?
Basically, it means controlling more parts of the supply chain.
Hmm.
So instead of just making the cement, UltraTech could start acquiring companies that are involved in, I don't know, extracting the raw materials or transporting the cement or even producing concrete, the finished product.
So, like, owning more pieces of the puzzle from start to finish.
Exactly. And that gives them way more control, right, over costs, quality, distribution. They're less reliant on those outside suppliers, and it could give them a real edge over the competition.
Sounds like they're building a whole cement empire brick by brick.
Huh, you could say that. And, this vertical integration strategy, it has big implications for the whole market. It makes it even tougher for those smaller companies to compete.
So it's like UltraTech's creating their own little world within the cement industry.
Mhm.
And breaking into that system, well, it's getting harder and harder.
Exactly. And this trend, this vertical integration, it's not just happening in cement. We're seeing it all over different industries. Companies are trying to get that control, that market share.
It's a fascinating game, that's for sure. But I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. We've covered UltraTech's acquisitions, the potential impacts on consumers and competition, the role of the government, the environmental concerns, even those strategies like vertical
And
integration.
we've only scratched the surface. The Indian cement industry, it's constantly changing, always something new happening. There are bound to be more surprises down the road.
So, dear listener, next time you see those concrete buildings, those bridges, those roads, maybe you'll see them in a whole new light. Think about all those business deals, those economic forces, even those environmental impacts that go into every bag of cement.
Keep an eye out for UltraTech's next move, right? Will they keep acquiring companies? Will they go all in on vertical integration? Or will they pull something totally unexpected?
And the big question, how will all of this shape the future of the Indian cement industry? And how will it affect the lives of millions of people?
Big questions worth pondering.
We've given you the information, the insights, the tools. Now it's your turn to connect the dots and see what conclusions you come up with. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.